Well, as the death toll rises from Israel's strikes on Gaza, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has warned of increasing military strength in its attacks against Hamas. For more on this, let's cross to Tahani Mustafa, a Senior Palestine Analyst with the International Crisis Group, who joins me now from Amman in Jordan. Tahani, good to have you with us this evening. Now, firstly, did you expect Israel to launch such a deadly strike, particularly during this holy month of Ramadan?
Well, I think many were quite skeptical as to whether we'd actually see the completion of phase one, never mind actually reach phase two. So it's really no surprise that Israel has unilaterally broken the ceasefire deal, considering that we'd already seen, even during the first phase, something like over 1,000 Israeli violations. That included things like drone attacks, shelling, gunfire, as well as the breaking and rescinding of a lot of the humanitarian protocols that had been agreed upon.
Yes. And what do you make of Benjamin Netanyahu's reasoning that the strikes were triggered by the lack of progress on talks to extend the ceasefire and, by extension of that, the return of hostages?
Well, I mean, the basis of what Netanyahu is claiming is that Hamas refused to accept the extension of the pause that we had seen in the first phase. Now, that comes against the backdrop of the fact that, Israel has claimed that Hamas refused to accept something that had been undisclosed to them in the original ceasefire proposal. Not to mention the fact that, the majority of the hostages that they wanted to see released in this extension phase would have been released in phase two anyway. And what Hamas was demanding was for the continuation of negotiations, a permanent cessation of hostilities, a full handover of prisoners and hostages on both sides, as well as allowing for sufficient amounts of humanitarian aid in, which, according to Israel, was completely unacceptable.
Now, looking towards the next couple of days, Israel has issued fresh evacuation notices for several neighborhoods in Gaza. These are concerning. So are we expecting more of such major strikes by Israel in the coming hours and even days?
Well, that is the indication that Israel has given when it says that it's willing to deploy full military force here in order to exert political pressure on Hamas. Worse yet, they're refusing to allow for the entry of aid, which is effectively using starvation now as a weapon in order to exert further political pressure on Hamas. So I think, certainly we can expect the situation to get, I think at this point, catastrophic doesn't really cut what we're really experiencing on the ground in the way of humanitarian, in the way of a humanitarian catastrophe. But absolutely, in the last few hours, we've seen Israel has not spared a single area of the Strip. Both the north, south and center of Gaza have been struck.
Yes, I mean, as you mentioned there, Gaza is virtually in ruins. We are seeing pictures of that with chronic supplies, lacking of supplies of food, water and power. So the question is, how can Palestinians in Gaza withstand this from a humanitarian point of view?
Well, I mean, there isn't really much way of being able to withstand this. I think this is, we're going to end up seeing Palestinians in Gaza, civilians in Gaza suffer the most. This is really just about how durable they ultimately can be, how much their survival instincts ultimately kick in. There's been absolutely no substantial pressure on Israel to try and allow for the entry of aid. Worse yet, we've seen the international community, the European Union, condemn Hamas for being the one to not accept an extension of the first phase. And we've also now seen that Netanyahu has sought the permission of Trump before going ahead with these strikes. So it's indicative that Israel is going to be able to do what it wants to do with complete impunity. And really, it's just up to the people of Gaza to do what they've been doing for the last 16 months, which is trying to find ways to survive this.
And how are you expecting Hamas to respond?
Well, according to Israeli reports, it's been indicative that Hamas has been able to sort of, regroup. It has been able to use this as an opportunity to reprieve. This hasn't really diminished their capabilities necessarily. And Hamas themselves have been, very clear that they are willing to respond in kind if they need to. They have demonstrated, and they have also made statements to the effect that if they need to, they do have the capacity to maintain a longer-term insurgency. And so I think, this is just something we're going to end up seeing where this continued in-person negotiations continues, and while Israel continues to pursue open warfare, and Hamas will endure as long as it can. This truly is a war of attrition here.
Yes, and do you think this war of attrition will put the safety of Israeli hostages still being held in Gaza in jeopardy?
Absolutely. I mean, look, in the last 16 months, it's primarily been negotiations that have secured the release of hostages. Israel's bombardment of the Strip, if anything, has managed to kill quite a number of their own hostages. It's really been these processes of humanitarian pauses and negotiations that has guaranteed their release. And, this was something that, again, had we seen the second phase come to fruition, we would have seen the full release of those hostages, which is something that, even Hamas themselves are demanding. So it's really difficult to imagine how the continued bombardment, continued continued pursuit of a strategy that has proven it doesn't work, is not making Israelis any safer. If anything, it has expanded the battleground, not just from Gaza now, but also the West Bank and into Israel proper with the increase in lone wolf attacks. So if anything, this is really a losing strategy.
Tahani, Hamas did say in its statement that it wants the Arab League to intervene. So, do you expect the various states in the region like Qatar to go beyond their current role as mediators?
Well, there isn't really much that these states can do in the way of leverage here. Qatar has been quite a useful mediator, but in terms of being able to exert any substantial financial pressure, military pressure, the Arab states simply don't have that capacity. They are significantly dependent on US aid, on Western aid, and it's precisely those states that are offering Israel the diplomatic and financial cover and obviously the security logistics to pursue its campaign in both Gaza and the West Bank. So in the way of leverage, we've seen very little from the Arab states, neither in terms of their capacity or even their willingness. And if they haven't done anything in the last 16 months, it's very unlikely that we're going to see them now start to try and use what little leverage they have.
Yes, and then speaking of pressure, what do you think is the status of Hamas in Gaza at the moment? How much support does Hamas have among the Palestinian civilians who have suffered so much and many who've also had to flee over the past year or so?
The support for Hamas politically has dwindled. Hamas's support even before the 7th of October was significantly low. That hasn't really changed since the 7th of October, and if anything, it's actually gotten lower. However, what is giving Hamas the capacity to regroup, to recruit at significant numbers, is the context itself, where quite literally there are no other alternatives for Gazans to pursue other than resistance. And unfortunately, Hamas is the last vestige of organized armed resistance that they have. And it's really the only thing that is giving some level of pushback against Israel's onslaught in Gaza.
Okay, Tahani Mustafa, really appreciate your insights into this. Thank you so much.
Thank you.